Yep, awesome. Hi guys, so this is the wonderful Grant Thomas. He's our speaker tonight. Two fun facts about Grant. He's never broken a bone in his whole life. Woohoo, go Grant. And he's writing his senior paper on video games. What's your favorite video game?
My favorite video game of all time is probably Pokemon.
Alright, so if you guys will bow your heads, we'll pray for Grant. Dear Lord, thank you so much for tonight, for a chance to just worship you and to be in community, God. Please watch over Grant as he gives this message. Help all the words and the meditations of his heart just all be you, God, so that we can just really be encouraged by your word and by your love, God. We thank you. Amen.
All right. So, I am an English major, and aside from majoring in unemployment, that means that I am very concerned about stories. I'm concerned about the characters in stories, long stories, short stories, stories on paper, stories in movies. I am concerned about stories. And that's what my talk is going to be about tonight. It's going to be about, dropping my talk. It is going to be about 3 stories from 3 different time periods and 3 very different people, but 3 stories that all have the same message. And that message is to ask God for rain, because God gives you rain in the spring. It is a message of hope. It is a message that says that God gives you the good things that you need in the time that you need them. So our first story is we're going to go all the way back to Zechariah. Now, audience participation here, show of hands, who of you have actually read us anything from Zechariah prior to tonight? That was a lot more than I was expecting. I have never opened to the book of Zechariah before I had to prepare for this talk. I had never read anything from it. I knew nothing about it other than it was this really slim book somewhere in the back of the Old Testament. So I had to look up, what is the deal with Zechariah? So Zechariah is a prophet. In his story, there's likely 2 people who actually wrote Zechariah, so their story begins in the Babylonian exile. And so for those of you who haven't taken your introduction to religion class, that is the period in time for the Israelites when they are hauled off to Babylonia. The temple is destroyed. Their religious leaders, their kings, the people that they hold very important to them, are carted off. I always remember being told in my introduction to religion class the story of how they were literally hooked through the noses and carted off into a foreign land. And the people of Israel are not doing well. They are having a very, very bad day. Because the destruction of the temple is more than just a church being destroyed. You know, we would laugh if Maine was to burn down again. That is not the case for the Israelites. It is everything to them. The temple is something that they have spent years building. It is where God physically lives. So to have the temple destroyed is a huge blow to Israel. So anyway, they're exiled for a while, they're living in captivity, and eventually Persia conquers Babylonia, and then the king of Persia, Cyrus, he delivers what's called Cyrus's edict. And it's this really important point in the history of Israel, because for the first time in several years, they are allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. So what my handy-dandy HarperCollins Study Bible told me about this time, and about Zechariah, and there's this really beautiful passage that it has. It tells us about why Zechariah. It says, the meaning of the name Zechariah is Yahweh has remembered. It suggests that the role was to weave memories and traditions of the first temple period into the new directions taken after exile. You have the nation of Israel who's finally rebuilding their greatest structure of the time. And if you read, stories about the second temple, it says even grander, even greater temple than the first one. And they are finally getting to reclaim that great story. And so in chapter 10, verse 1, when Zechariah writes, ask rain from the Lord in the season of spring rain, who gives showers of rain to you, the vegetation in the field to everyone. I feel that. that history in his words. I can feel the pain that the Israelites have suffered and the immense joy of finally getting to be able to return to their homeland and to rebuild the temple and worship God once again. It is a story of hope. It's a story of people who didn't have hope for a long time and then finally are given hope again and are celebrating that hope. And it's an incredible story, and it's a powerful story. And that's where this verse comes from. It comes out of that circumstances. It comes out of that understanding. And that's why I think Zechariah's name is especially beautiful, Yahweh has remembered. He hasn't forgotten you. And even in your most hopeless of times, he is still with you, still amongst you. And to them, this was what proved it. This was their springtime. This was their reign, was getting to return home to rebuild the temple. So that's the first story. So that's Zechariah. So keep that in your mind. Our second story is about another really important man, as I once again knock this off the stand. So unless you've been living under a rock, you might know that there's a very important thing that happens on Tuesday. Contrary to popular belief, it's not Halloween, although that is very important. It's the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And the Reformation was led by a very important man by the name of Martin Luther. You may recognize him from such famous hits as Luther College. So obviously Martin Luther is a really important person in the history of the world. He finds the Protestant religion. He points out some problems with Catholicism at the time. He challenges the Pope. Uses the printing press for the first time effectively. It's a very important person in the history of the world. And the second story is about him. Now there's this really classic story about how Martin Luther was called into ministry. He was originally supposed to be a lawyer. It was a very good profession had upward mobility. It was going to make him a lot of money. That's what his parents wanted him to do, so that's what he was doing. So anyway, one day he is walking along the road to Erfurt, because that's what people did in that time, is they walked. And this giant storm comes out of nowhere, and there's thunder, and there's rain, and there's wind, and it's just this really bad time for Martin Luther, because he's really scared. He's cowering in this rain, he's cowering in the storm, and then always this tale is told that a lightning bolt strikes right next to where he is standing. And he is afraid. He is terrified. So Martin Luther, studying to be a lawyer, cries out to God and says, God, if you save me, I swear I will dedicate my life to you. I will shave my head in a really funny manner. I will do all these great things in your name. And what do you guess happens next? So, of course, God saves him, because you never make a promise to God lightly. And so Luther is given his chance. He survives the storm. And he does. He goes, he dedicates his life to the church. He becomes a monk. He studies, he reads the Bible. And then the rest is basically history from there. And that is, for Luther, a very physical storm. It's a literal storm, not metaphorical in the way that it was for the Israelites. It's a literal storm that he had to go through, right? And his storms didn't end there. He worked really hard to translate the Bible. It took him about 5 years of his life studying German and Latin and Greek and trying to study those languages, Hebrew, learning them, translating the Bible, the diet of worms, and a point where he literally got kidnapped. Granted, they were his friends, but I imagine that was still pretty terrifying to be kidnapped. He's taken away out of his family, he's taken away from his friends, he's excommunicated by the church, he is, people try to kill him. He strikes out into a world that is not receptive to what he has to say. But he asks God for rain in the spring. Eventually, he's able to do great things with his life. He's able to bring about great change, both for himself, for the church, for the world at large. He's able to do these great things because he asked God. It's about that. It's about that hope, holding on to what we have and what we know, and asking God for the things we don't have. Which brings us to our last story. And this is going to be my story. So when I first came to Luther, I was actually not an English major, I was a music major. I was in music education. which if you ask any music major, that's a really tough major to be. When I graduated from high school, I was absolutely sure music was what I wanted to do. I was first year trombone in my high school band. I went to All-State, I went to honor bands. I was involved in these community music groups that were audition only and were very prestigious. And I was like, music, that's gotta be what I gotta do. These are the gifts that God has given me. That's what I'm doing with my life. And I went through my first year, and it was pretty great. I got into concert band, and that was really amazing to me. I got to go on tour, I got my band name, I had a great time. And then my sophomore year comes around, and in the time between my first year and my sophomore year, my first time without lessons with Dr. Smith, I really struggled that summer. I really had a hard time being okay with the way that I was playing. I felt like I was starting to make some reverse progress, because there's this thing that happens to every musician when they come to college, that they have to unlearn certain ways that they have learned to play their instrument or to use their voice. Things that Dr. Smith is really nice to call inefficiencies, and not just the wrong way to play your instrument. And it was really hard for me to learn that, because I was so used to success, I wasn't used to struggling in my music. And so it was really hurting, and I was not sure. It's like, this isn't good anymore. I'm not happy with myself. And every time I kept trying to go into that practice room and go in it alone and trying to make myself better, I would only get worse. And it got to a point where I was so fed up. I was so tired with music, I was ready to just put down my horn and walk away and never touch it again. But that was not the right decision for me. I knew that music was still too important. I had a gift that I was given from God to be a musician, and it was something that I had to do. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was like, what do you want me to do, God? Like, I can't be a music major. That's too much. That's too intense. Like, what else am I supposed to do? And so I asked God for rain. I was like, what good is going to come out of what I'm doing right now? Because right now, it just feels like bad. And I hate everything about what I'm doing. And then I got into an advising meeting. And I had a realization. It's like, I have a music minor with what I'm done. I need one more class to finish a music minor. And I was talking to my advisor, and I was saying, I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to do anymore. This isn't something I'm excited about. And my advisor said, it's like, well, you took that English class when you were in first year, and you seemed like you really liked that. So maybe English is something you need to pursue. And I went and I talked to some of the English professors, and they told me about what I could expect and what the program was going to be like, and they really encouraged me to do it. And so I followed that. And starting in the spring of my sophomore year, I became an English major and a music minor. And it turns out that was exactly what I needed to do. Once the pressure of being a music major was gone, I started improving as a musician. And then I got to my junior recital, and that was just super amazing because I was just having fun again. I had really re-embraced my gift of music and my joy of music. And at the same time, I was discovering this whole new part of myself that loved stories, that loved English. And it was perfect. It was my springtime. And while it didn't seem at first like that could have possibly been the direction I was supposed to go, if you had told senior year me that I should have never touched a music major, I would have just flat out ignored you. But it turns out that was the path for me to go, that was where I needed to be. And that was my rain. That was what I needed to find in myself. Is I had to ask God for rain. So step one is to ask God for rain. And then I had to realize what that rain was. And even though it seemed counterintuitive, even though it seemed counterproductive, that was what was better for me in the end. That produced vegetation. That produced fruit for me. And so, in the end, all three of these stories are the same. They are about the same struggle of the world coming against you, about the world throwing things at you that you're not ready for, you're not prepared for, showing you its worst. And each time, what made it better for the person involved in that story, what made it better for Zechariah, what made it better for Martin Luther, and what made it better for me, is turning back to God and asking Him for help. Because God is a merciful God, and God gives you what you ask of him. And it seems too simple, because it is. God doesn't withhold good things from you. I promise he doesn't. And even if it seems like what you're going through is insurmountable, and if it seems like what you're going through cannot possibly be what God wants for you, it's because the best is still yet to come. That just maybe means it's your winter and not your spring. And that's okay. So reach out to God. Reach out to these people around you. This is a community here, and everyone's willing to hear your problems and be there for you. Reach out to God and ask for that rain to come, because God gives you rain in the spring. So now we're going to head into our time for prayer and reflection. So this is a time for you to kind of reflect on things that you have gone through in this last week. You can go light a candle at the prayer station and kind of spread yourselves all throughout here. Maybe if you even want to go outside, prayer team will be available to pray for you, pray over you if you want to reach out for someone else. You can also just sit in your chair in quiet reflection. You can read the Bible if you have the Bible on you. You can dance, sing, do origami, do whatever you need to do. This is your time to kind of focus yourself and center yourself. There are some questions up here for you to ponder with a friend that maybe can help you find inner peace. But we're going to invite the music team to come back up.
I invite you guys to come and have a time of prayer and reflection and worship as you guys are.